Chapter 3. Rosie and Judd. Mrs. Jarvis used up a lot of her remaining strength that morning. She led the children away from the slums where they'd lived for the past year and down street after street until they came to a much bigger, quieter part of town, where the houses were big and stately. She leaned against some railings to rest. Emily sat down next to her, anxious for her mother. "Now you've got to be good," Mrs. Jarvis said to them. "I'm going to take you to the house where I used to work. Only you must be good, promise me." "Ma, of course, will be good," Emily said. Mrs. Jarvis nodded. "Yes, you're always good. That's the one thing I did right." In the window behind them, a finch sang in his tiny cage. It only had room to hop from the floor of its cage to a little perch and down again. Hop, 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 up and down. "Listen to that bird," said Jim. "They only sing when they're on their own," Emily told him. "He's singing for a friend." "Poor little thing," said Lizzie, trapped in a cage. "We'd better go on," their mother said. "I'm going to take you to see the only friend I've got in the world. Rosie, she's called. You've heard me talk about Rosie at the big house." The children nodded. It was a long time since their mother had worked in his lordship's kitchen, but she still had stories to tell about it. "And if Rosie can't help us," she sighed, "nobody can." Emily helped her up again, and they moved slowly on, pausing as the carriages swept past them. When they reached the big house at last, Mrs. Jarvis was exhausted and sat down on the steps to rest again. The children gazed up at a tall building. "Is this where we're going to live?" asked Lizzie. "It's too grand for us, Lizzie," said Emily. Even though she was only 10, she knew that families like theirs didn't end up in houses like these. Jim's eyes were fixed on something he could see on the top of the steps. It was an iron boot scraper, and it was the shape of a dog's head. The huge snapping mouth of the dog was wide open, so people could scrape the mud off their boots in its teeth. "I'd never put my foot in there," he said. "Not even with Lizzie's boots on. I wouldn't. It'd come snarling down at me and bite my toes right off." When the mother was rested, she picked up her bundle again and led the children down some steps to the basement of the house. She sank against the door, all strength gone. "Be good," she murmured. She lifted the knocker. They heard rapid footsteps coming. Mrs. Jarvis quickly bent down and kissed both the girls on the tops of their head. "God bless you both," she said. Emily looked at her, suddenly afraid. She was about to ask her mother what was happening when the door was opened by a large, flowery woman in a white pinafore. She had the sleeves of her dress rolled up, so her arms bulged out of them. Her hands and wrists were covered in dough, and as she flung up her arms in greeting, Jim could see that her elbows were red and powdery. "Annie Jarvis," the woman gasped. "I never thought I'd see you again." She hugged her. "You ain't come looking for work, have you? All this time? Judd's going spare, she is, looking for a new cook. She's got me at it, and my dough's like a boulder. She'll soon put me back on serving upstairs." While she was talking, she hauled Mrs. Jarvis and the children into the kitchen and set stools for them round the stove. She pushed aside the big mixing bowl and sat with her elbows on the table. She reached over to Mrs. Jarvis and put her hand on her forehead. "Hot." Her voice was soft with concern. "You're so hot, Annie, and as white as snow." "You've been turned out, haven't you?" Mrs. Jarvis nodded. "You got anywhere?" "No." "And you're not fit for work, you know that. There's no work left in you, Annie Jarvis." A bell jangled over the door. "Lord, that's for the coffees. I ain't done them. Anyone comes down and you duck under that table quick, mind," she said to the children. All right," she shouted. "His lordship can wait 5 minutes, can't he, while I talk to my friend here?" She glanced at Mrs. Jarvis again. Her face puckered in frowns. "My sister, as good as. No, he can't wait. His lordship waits for nothing." As she was talking, she was ladling coffee and milk into jugs and setting them on a tray. She rubbed her floury hands on her pinafore, took it off and changed into a clean one. And as a quick afterthought, she poured some of the coffee into a cup and edged it across the table to Mrs. Jarvis. Go on, she urged. Take it for all the good bread you've baked for him. There's only one home left to you now, Annie. It's the house, ain't it? Heaven help you. The workhouse. We ain't going to the workhouse, Ma, Emily asked. The children had heard terrifying stories about the workhouses. They'd heard that people who went there sometimes had to stay for the rest of their lives. People died in there. Help Rosie out with the bread, Emily, Mrs. Jarvis suggested, her voice steady now, and stronger. It would be a good turn that she'd appreciate. Emily did as she was told. A few minutes later, Rosie came down. I've asked Judd to come, she mouthed. There was a rustle of a long skirt on the stairs, and Judd, the housekeeper, came in, stern and brisk. She came straight to Mrs. Jarvis and stood with her hands on her hips. Rosie tells me you're in a bad way, Annie Jarvis, and I must say, you look it. I haven't come to make trouble, Judd. I've only come to say goodbye to you and Rosie, because you've always been kind to me. If we've been kind to you, it's because you've always done your work well, and that's what matters, Judd sniffed. She looked over Emily's shoulder as the girl dolloped her dough on the table and pushed her hands in to knead it. It was as if Emily was performing some kind of magic, the way the three women watched her in silence. Can cook, can you? Judd asked Emily.